Today we're talking about your shit, but not the shit you think about. We're not necessarily talking about poop today, right, Amy? Although, knowing us, that topic will come up eventually. No, we're talking about how to prioritize the shit in your life and the shit in your journey. And I just told Amy before we hit record that I had a surprise that I wanted to show her. Hold on. Don't mind the sound of my desk going down. Amy, do you like the new shirt that I recently acquired? It is a dung beetle sitting on top of some dung, and it says, "I've seen some shit."
I love it.
Thank you. Brilliant. I do too. It's one of my recent acquisitions. I found it when we were in Black Mountain for my herbal conference, and I had to bring this home.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Thank you.
I couldn't see it earlier, what it said, but it's glorious.
But now you know. Would you like to lead us off on how the kids might prioritize their shit?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main focus of today is talking a bit about the process of how you're prioritizing your journey. So many people, I think, start at the wrong place. And it could be very well intentioned. I think providers start people at the wrong place too. So I don't think that it's just people on their own doing it. I think providers, honestly, sometimes start at the wrong part of the journey. Like they're jumping ahead or they're cutting corners. And sometimes they don't understand necessarily that they're cutting corners, but the process is almost backwards. I think a lot of times when you think about gut stuff, you have to think about things that are much more upstream versus jumping straight to the microbiome. I feel like that's the thing I typically see now in the SIBO IBS space is, we're going to jump straight to modulating the gut microbiome and we're not really going to prioritize other things until that gets taken care of. And in reality, I think the people that are more successful actually prioritize other things first, and it makes it much easier to modulate the microbiome.
Yeah, and you can think of it as like a foundations versus fine-tuning sort of perspective as well. Like there are foundations for health that are going to affect every cell of your body. And then there are things that are probably downstream consequences of other dysfunction in the body. So I'll give one example to lead us off. Hormones. A lot of times people want to lead with hormones, especially like heaven forbid if they go to a hormone specialist, integrative MD type of person. Like, oh, no matter what ails you, we're going to slap you on some bioidentical hormones. And I'm not saying that that is without a time and a place, but I think for the majority of people, like 90% of people, I feel like hormones are just responding to other stuff going on in your body. Like your body just doesn't willy-nilly decide, you know what I would like to do? I would like to have a really irregular period. That sounds rad. Or like in a man's case, oh, you know what? I'm sick of testosterone. Let's just get rid of it. Let's just have low testosterone for the rest of our days. That sounds great. That doesn't happen. There's something going on like nutritionally or with stress chemistry or sleep. Like there's something else that's more foundational happening in that person's body that is making the hormones react in that way. So for a lot of cases, starting right out the gate with hormones is an ineffective way of going about helping that person.
Yeah, for sure. I know in the case of thyroid, I see that all the time where someone has subclinical thyroid markers where maybe their T3 is on the lower side. And it's a pattern I see a lot with undereating and just nutrition being off. So I could totally see someone going to a functional provider and them saying, ooh, let's put you on thyroid hormones for a little bit because your T3 is low. And that should help like your metabolic function, instead of being like, oh, your T3 is low because your body feels like it needs to be in a budgeted state because resources are low. Your body's doing exactly what it should. And I think there are times where maybe it makes sense to supplement with hormones, but I think you want to try the obvious thing first of this is why the hormones are probably low, and working on nutrition and working on any other elements that could be driving them low makes total sense. But I see that a lot with thyroid. It's a good point to talk about hormones because they're definitely going to be more reacting to what the environment is
what the
telling
environment
them
necessitates.
Right.
Right. And there are so many good examples of this. But yeah, I think thyroid is a good example. Certainly, if you have somebody who is blatantly hypothyroid and their gland is incapable of
Right.
producing that appropriate amount.
Autoimmune situations.
Yeah, if you have somebody whose TSH is genuinely elevated, it is entirely appropriate to slap that person on some Levo or some Armor or whatever it might be. So it's not that we're even saying don't treat the hormones, but it's like don't put all of your eggs into that basket immediately.
Yeah.
And again, like the hormone doctors usually give everybody the hormones. The Lyme disease doctors diagnose everybody with Lyme disease. The SIBO specialist, unless it's you or me, pretty much, other SIBO specialists diagnose everybody and their brother with SIBO. And it's like they have this really tight lens. And the thing that drives me kind of batshit, honestly, is that this is by and large done by a group of people who claim to be holistic and integrative and functional, and they want to get to the root cause of the problem. And they're not. Like, again, you take the person you just showed us, the person with low T3 and kind of low budgeted metabolic state, but it's because of under eating. Giving that person a hormone is A, probably not going to help them profoundly, but B, even if it did, you're not getting to the root cause of the problem. So
Right.
for a group of people who claim to want to understand the root cause and they talk about that all day, every day in their damn marketing, it's frustrating to see people lead off with something that is not at all a root cause.
Right. And I think, again, like this comes into play too, like microbiome wise. I mean, what do we hear in the functional medicine space all the time? The 5 R's. I always get them mixed up, but they're all just narrowed in on the microbiome piece of the puzzle.
Well, and you know what I think that is to some extent? It's an excuse to get you to buy all the supplements, right? Like restore, rebuild, replenish, renew, reseed, whatever they are. I don't even know either.
Right.
But, you know, it's like it's justifying to this group of practitioners, oh, you need to put all of your people on a leaky gut product, a probiotic, an antimicrobial, a biofilm disruptor, or whatever. And it's very protocol driven typically. But you just touched on another one. Leaky gut is another great example of something that is not a root cause. It's not something foundational that you should be prioritizing. Now, there are maybe cases where it makes sense. Like if I had somebody who was freshly diagnosed with celiac disease or Crohn's, or freshly had some antibiotics and they were having GI upset from that, or, you know, somebody who had some damage due to NSAIDs and that was kind of a fresh thing for them as well. Sure, slap them on some L-glutamine and that will probably nudge them in the right direction. But you've got to trace back the reasons for why that person has a leaky gut in the first place. Is it because their nutrition is shit? They don't get enough dietary fiber. They don't get dietary diversity. They have dysbiosis. And they're overeating sugar and they have a crop of Candida that's raging in their gut. Is it sleep? Is it stress? Is it like leaky gut is a downstream consequence of other shit in your body being awry. And again, like my profession will tell you with a straight face that the root cause of your tummy problems is leaky gut, but it absolutely is not. It's on the way to being a root cause. It's like 2 steps away from being correct, but you have to look for the root of the root of the root if you really want to get that person well.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to prioritizing things, it can make or break your journey. And that is something that I think is hard to comprehend a little bit. I think when you explain it, it makes sense to people. So I'm not saying it's super hard to comprehend, but when you're so narrowed in on something, it's just like not something people are paying attention to. Because I've generally seen people who might have done the correct interventions, but they've just missed a piece of the puzzle that's preventing progress. Maybe they took a prokinetic and it's like generally a little bit helpful, but in combination with getting the diet squared away, you know, working on sleep, it would have even more effect than if they were just doing that in isolation. But that's, again, like a lot of times when people aren't prioritizing the right things or they've cut corners to where they're jumping ahead to something that's further down the process. that thing that they're doing might not be really that effective, but if they had other pieces in line, it could really help. And I think when you prioritize correctly too, you oftentimes need much less intervention downstream. So, if you are working on nutrition, you're going to have the resources to help with your gut's immune function and your gut's digestive capacity and motility.
And histamine and hormones.
Right.
And
Everything.
detoxification.
Right. Yeah, no, I think, again, it's just one of those things where people jumping to the fancy things and the things that are marketed to them as being the most beneficial, it just usually misses the mark and is more complicated than it needs to be most of the time. So yeah, I think that a lot of times many interventions are not needed in the IBS and SIBO space. If you would just go down the process in an order that makes sense, and your order of operations is fairly on point, if that makes sense. I don't think it has to be perfect, but I think the fundamentals need to be corrected first, and then you just kind of see where you're at that point and how many interventions do you need beyond that point.
So for example, and I love that you use the words order of operations, by the way. I don't even know if they teach this in math classes anymore because now they got that new fancy math, which I dread having to learn, by the way. We're getting there. My daughter's going to go into 3rd grade soon, and we're getting to the point where we're going to have to learn Common Core math to help her with it, and I dread it. Probably going to make Mike do that, honestly. I'll help with the other stuff. But remember, you do all the stuff inside the parentheses first, then you do the things outside of the parentheses. Remember that crap from math class? And if you do it backwards, if you do the stuff just as it's written on the page, you're going to get a completely wrong answer. You have to follow the order of operations. And I think you're right. It's not to say that you have to do it all perfectly, but if you are jumping forward to hormones and histamine and leaky gut and detoxification and starving the SIBO, starving the Candida, but your sleep is shit, or you're stressed out of your mind, or your nutrition is crap and you're not getting any nutrients or any fiber or any protein or whatever, you could take all the best supplements for mast cell activation syndrome and it's not going to do a damn thing because there are much bigger fish to fry in the foundational, unsexy, basic department.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And I think that again, it's usually the fundamentals that need more tweaking than the supplements or the fancy stuff. Again, I can't say this enough. Probably 95% of my patients are missing the mark in big ways nutritionally. And again, that affects every system. Same thing with sleep. Sleep's a big one. And sometimes too, even with the fundamentals, you might want to prioritize certain things first. It might make sense. To me, someone's sleep's going to be crap if they're majorly under eating. So you might want to try doing some nutritional things to see if it helps with sleep first, versus maybe going really intensely into the nervine rabbit hole as a solution for sleep. And you could still do that maybe while you're supporting the nutrition element. That's totally fine, I think. But generally, again, I see a lot of nutrition issues affecting sleep. So sometimes I prioritize nutrition a little bit before
blood sugar
sleep
too.
Right.
If you're having massive blood sugar swings, that's going to impair your sleep. That's going to make you more inflamed.
Right.
That's going to mess with hormone signaling like thyroid, estrogen, whatever. It's definitely going to piss off your mast cells. It's going to, instigate some leaky gut kind of stuff. So, yeah, I think that even looking at the nutrition from the really simple angle of managing blood sugar more effectively, that has the potential to really stem out a lot. And I will share this briefly. I think I've picked on him a teeny bit here or there on this podcast. But honestly, I do have to give props to Datis Karazian in this regard, because I still remember vividly when I went to a lot of his seminars back in the heyday, and I lived in California. I remember, especially at his functional blood chemistry class, he always made the point of drilling it into our heads. you have to take care of blood sugar and blood flow issues first. If you jump ahead to like the liver or individual nutrients or individual whatever, and their blood sugar is shit, or their ability to bring oxygen to the tissues is shit, good luck, because nothing is going to heal without oxygen and nothing is going to heal without proper fuel delivery. And so he kept really like breaking that home throughout the whole process. We got to the thyroid part of the seminar and he would hearken back to blood sugar and blood flow before you do thyroid. And I always appreciated that. And I think that he's spot on, even within, the context of nutrition. If you have somebody who's blatantly iron deficient or blatantly B12 deficient, that might have to take priority over everything else, because that's going to affect your ability to carry oxygen to your tissues, and nothing is going to heal without oxygen.
Right. Yeah. No, 100%. I think that it's another thing too, where there's probably nuance for your situation compared to someone else as well. Like if you are potentially in a job that you hate and it's really affecting your function, that might be something that has to take much higher priority than like movement or some of these other fundamental pieces. And again, sometimes it's like you might have a situation where you can't get out of that job super quickly. So you have to kind of like maybe work on other fundamentals first and maybe try to find ways to mitigate the stress a little bit while you work on other things. So I think there is some nuance here when it comes to the fundamentals and what to prioritize first. Again, most of the time I sort of focus on nutrition first, just because it's an area that one is usually stressing the person out from a physical, emotional, mental standpoint. So with our IBS patients in general, it's going to be just an area that I know is typically deficient and really problematic if
you
we
have
don't
many windows of opportunity to help that person with nutrition.
Many windows of opportunity. You're right. But yeah, I mean, I think some of the other things too, it takes a little bit of a nuancy thing to understand what might make the biggest bang for that person's buck at the moment and help them kind of get maybe like 10% better here. And, if we can get them there, then we can work on some other things. So I've seen that too sometimes with like the sleep piece. If the sleep is so bad that it's affecting their ability, like their energy to focus on nutrition or things like that, maybe we do some more drastic things to help with sleep. And there could be bigger elements in someone like that. Maybe they have sleep apnea or like they're a shift worker or something like that, where it's like there's some bigger sleep issues potentially going on there. But yeah, it's going to take a little bit of nuance, but if you're hanging around the fundamentals, you're probably in the right place at the beginning. And if you've been too deep in the weeds in like the microbiome world and you haven't made much progress, you might want to pull yourself back out and reassess the fundamentals again and figure out maybe ways to tweak and better some of the fundamentals before even going any further gut-wise.
Yeah. And we see this so frequently, right? Like we've seen people who have taken rifaximin 10 times and the SIBO keeps coming back. Or they've taken antifungals a million times and the Candida keeps coming back. But again, they're super stressed. They're not sleeping. Their nutrition is garbage. They're not getting any nutrition in their body. And it's like, yeah, duh. Of course it's coming back. This is not a mystery. And I'm being a little bit of a jerk saying it that way. But seriously, like from our perspective, it's no longer shocking when that sort of story presents itself. But, when people are stuck in that headspace of SIBO is the problem, that's what I need to do. I need to kill the SIBO and starve the SIBO. And that's what I just need to do. And then if I just treat the SIBO, then I'm going to be all puppies and rainbows and unicorns again. And it's going to be great. My life's going to be great if I can just treat the damn SIBO. And it's like, they're so lasered in on the one sexy thing that they can't see the forest for the trees. And it's tough sometimes. I just straight up told a patient yesterday, I do not think we will be able to heal her gut until we somehow teach her vagus nerve that she is safe. She's
Right.
absolutely stuck in fight or flight mode. And she has a lot of we talked about resentment in yesterday's call. She feels like she's doing everything right, but she still doesn't feel good. And that makes her very resentful. And it's like, I don't think that it's going to be possible to heal your gut with that sort of heavy, toxic mental shit weighing you down. I think that you have to take care of that first. So, we'll see. It's the ultimate, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. I don't know if she'll listen to me and do anything about it, but I hope she does.
Yeah, the laser focused is an interesting way to put it. It reminds me of the Michelle Cavanaugh episode we did where she had the ants.
Yes.
So she basically says, anxiety and hypervigilance is sort of like if you're looking at the ground, ants don't look very scary or anything. They're just ants. You walk over them every day. But someone that's in a very fight or flight, anxious state, it's almost like they take a magnifying glass to the ant and it's like, whoa, that actually is scary now that it's so up close and magnified.
I did one of these on that call. I remember when she busted out the ant face. I kind of recoiled and jumped back.
The ant face, the magnified ant face. But I think, again, that's what happens, and that's what tends to skew people's ability to figure out what to prioritize is because fear comes into play. And once the fear kind of comes into play, it's hard to reassess and figure out what should come first. And it feels like the thing that should come first is the scariest thing, which is the SIBO. So it's in the microbiome piece. And I honestly think even just the microbiome being bugs, characterized as bugs in a weird way, sometimes makes people think it's an infection or
it's germs, it's dirty.
Right.
It's icky.
I need to cleanse my gut. I almost think that plays into it psychologically a little bit too. Yeah. I need to get rid of these bugs.
Well, and I definitely think it plays into the war mentality of it's this living being against another living being. And I have a living enemy that I can attack and have a war with. So I think that plays into it in that regard as well. I love that you brought up the Michelle Cavanaugh ant thing because I'm going to expand on it briefly. So imagine if you were sitting down for a picnic and maybe there was something awry. Maybe your nervous system sensed that there was something concerning afoot, but you had a big old magnifying glass blowing up the ants on the picnic blanket. And the ants were these giant, whoa, holy crap, really scary ants. It's going to make you focus on that scary looking ant. Meanwhile, the actual bear, the elephant in the room, so to speak, is right behind you. And if you just took your eyeballs off of the magnifying glass for a moment, you would see the big honking bear growling behind you. But again, it's the anxiety and the fear and the medically induced PTSD of it all, people get so zoomed in on that giant ant face and they're so terrified of the ant that they can't see anything else around them. It could be really obvious. I had a guy, and I know I told you this off camera, but I had a guy who wanted to work with me and he told me absolutely matter-of-factly he had Candida and that's why he wanted to work with me. Because I made a comment when we started our discovery call that none of his symptoms were GI related. So I was curious why he was doing a discovery call with me. His symptoms were brain fog, fatigue, and Hashimoto's. I was like, okay, but I'm the IBS SIBO person. Why are you here? And he said, oh, because I have Candida and that's what I actually need to treat is the Candida. And I'm like, okay, tell me more about that. Every single stool test, every single test he's ever done has come back negative for Candida, but he knew it was wrong. Well, I'm like, all right, perhaps. I'm suspicious now. And so we talk a little bit more and I said, well, even if you do have Candida, here's the thing. You wouldn't be working with me to just get recommendations for antimicrobials. That shit's available for free on the internet. If I remember correctly, the way he found me was because of my free YouTube video talking about favorite antimicrobials for Candida.
Right.
So you already have all of those tricks from I don't have any other antimicrobial up my sleeve that I'm holding out and gatekeeping here. Like, I already told you my favorite antimicrobials for Candida. So that is not why you would be paying me to work with you. So I explained that we would be working on the root causes of the Candida. Like, why would you have Candida in the first place? And then that's what we would be assessing and working on together. So I asked him a couple of questions. I said, how's your blood sugar, for example? And he said, oh, it's borderline high. And I hear that and I'm thinking high 90s, right, for fasting. We talk another minute and he said, yeah, my fasting blood sugar is like 120. And I'm like, oh,
yeah.
Oh, okay. No, that's like diabetic or very close to it. Okay. All right. We could absolutely work on that. And innocently, I asked, how's your sleep? And he said, oh, I've known that I've had sleep apnea since 2011. I've never treated it. I've never done anything with it, but I got diagnosed in 2011.
And like the fatigue and all the symptoms.
Yes.
You're right.
Like fatigue and brain fog are probably two of the most common symptoms of sleep apnea. And he shared in that call, he said, I only very recently tried the CPAP. I tried it for 2 nights and I hated it. Yeah, duh. Because you're wearing something on your face when you're sleeping. That's going to suck initially. Right. Nobody on the history of planet Earth has ever loved their CPAP machine the first 2 nights that they used it. You have to give it
Someone's going to comment below and be like, I love my CPAP.
Well, but did you love it the first time you tried it?
Yeah.
That's
I'm
the
just
thing.
giving you grief.
No, I know. No, I'll get comments for other stuff. No worries. But, it's like, you have to give it time to actually affect your physiology, bro. And when we ended up parting ways, I suggested to him, I don't think you have Candida. I think that what you are struggling with is primarily due to sleep apnea, and you need to treat that. And I could tell he was a little bit frustrated that he even mentioned the sleep apnea, because in his mind, like, oh, I should have kept my mouth shut and I should have then she would have worked with me. But, I told him, no, this is not an appropriate match. I'm not, you need to treat the sleep apnea, not Candida. And again, I hope that he listened to me. I don't know if he did. Again, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. He had convinced himself he had Candida and he was going to chase that sexy thing versus doing the unsexy thing, which is just work on his sleep and his sleep apnea.
Yeah.
The Candida was more appealing to him for whatever reason. And that made more sense and clicked with his brain. But, you can't jump forward to something like Candida and chase that goose and ignore something as fundamental as sleep.
Yeah.
It's a third of your life for a reason. It's important.
Yeah. Well, and I think, again, like, some people might think that they want to work with us because of expertise, of protocols, and of, the sciencey part. I would say, again, the things that make us more successful as a provider, from my standpoint, is being able to lead someone towards the right process for them. So what factors do you need to focus on first? And then I think the coaching piece. So how do you get through barriers mentally, physically? How do you adapt? I think is another big piece of it. And the sciencey piece, I think, is like important to a degree, but the ability to prioritize different things over other things at different times. So having a process that makes sense and works. But I think the other thing is just being able to coach people through their biases, barriers that come up, challenges that come up, blind spots. Yeah. Bullshit that people can spew to us sometimes. So yeah, I mean, that's to me usually what gets people results is the process, working on barriers, things like that. It's not necessarily this supplement that I know about that
we're not gatekeeping anything. People.
Right, is the best cure-all for Candida. It's more of like the ability to kind of critically think and assess different factors that are at play and what's going to help the most first and maybe what to focus on later if we have to.
But a good word is navigation.
Yeah, navigation's a great word.
Navigating the ups and downs and like, oh, I added in more carbs and I got bloated. How do I navigate this? Like, do I keep going or do I throttle back? And like, I tried the HCL challenge and here's what it did to me. Like, there are so many
Right.
points where you need to maneuver and make choices, and there are forks in the road. Do I go left or do I go right? And having somebody to guide you and help with that navigation, I think, I agree. I think that's what we actually do. But you're right. Some people still come to us, even with 184 podcast episodes at this point, right? But people still come to us and they think that we have like the magic supplement for SIBO or Candida or leaky gut. And it's like, we're not gatekeeping anything. We've talked about our favorite products and brands and formulas, and I don't have some magic Candida supplement that I reserve only for the people who pay me money. Like, that's not it. It's if you want a guide on this journey and somebody who will call you out on your shit, that's more of what I see. And again, I like the guy with the sleep apnea. I called him out. I told him, I do not think you have Candida. I think what you're dealing with is 100% due to your sleep apnea, and that's what you need to focus on. He didn't want to hear that. I was not a popular lady in that call in that moment. He was kind of a little bit miffed that he brought it up and kind of ruined his chances of working with me, but it needed to be said.
Right.
And I hoped and pray to God that he listened to me for that matter. But yeah, I think that that's the art behind this. It's one thing to see a protocol or slap together a protocol or a formula, right? But it's another to help that individual person and really guide them through the ups and downs that they're going to experience.
Another thing I will add is like sometimes there needs to be supports to help you achieve fundamental success. So I think about nutrition sometimes where people might need digestive support and that helps them increase calories. So honestly, a lot of people, again, I think their digestion and their digestive capacity is going to improve a lot once they get nutrition up, but that process can be challenging if their nutrition's or if their digestion's throttled down because their intake's low. So giving their body some time and a little bit extra support to have on board while they're increasing calories can be really helpful and help minimize symptoms and make it an easier process while they're adding calories in. So I think, again, there is a balance sometimes of doing supportive stuff so that you can achieve the fundamentals. Or again, like if sleep's really kind of disturbed and you've tried some other things first, maybe you've worked on nutrition and sleep's still a little wonky, and you've tried some sleep hygiene stuff, like maybe it makes sense to do a little valerian or passion flower or melatonin or some intervention that might help you achieve the fundamentals. So I don't think it's just like always as simple as don't do any supplements or any interventions until nutrition, this or that is covered, because you could make it an easier process band-aiding certain things or supporting certain things. Not everyone needs an enzyme or stomach acid to increase calories, but there are individuals where helping a little bit takes the edge off so that it's not as challenging. And again, I think there's different situations like that. Or again, if you're in a really stressful period of time and you're working on getting out of it, maybe ashwagandha makes sense. Mm-hmm. Or some adaptogenic herbs make sense during that time period.
It's kind of like a crutch, right? Like, we're not going to be the jerks who tell somebody with a broken leg, hey, you're not allowed to use your crutch, right? So if you have constipation, you might genuinely benefit from taking a laxative for a period of time while you focus on the roots of the problem. Or if you have bloating or abdominal pain that's significant enough that it's impeding your ability to nourish yourself, it might be a really, really great crutch to give you a prokinetic for 6 months or whatever it might be, so that you can add the foods in with ease and nourish your body and not feel like hot garbage in the process. So yeah, I think that Band-Aids and crutches are absolutely valuable as long as there's an understanding that they're just Band-Aids.
Right. And the goal is that the prokinetic isn't necessarily always fixing something that's inherently broken. It's like, oh no, all these other pieces, once they fall into place, usually the need for the prokinetic goes down. Well, so the understanding that it is a crutch, if that makes sense. Some people I think are like, oh no, this is the problem.
Yeah.
Instead of maybe nutrition being the bigger piece, if that makes sense.
Or vagal tone or something like that. I will say the way that I actually teach it to my students in FODMAP Freedom when we talk about prokinetics and even like HCl, bile, and enzymes, right up front, I tell them these are the cheater, pumpkin eater ways of helping you feel better before you otherwise would have, right? Like doing everything you're doing right now, you would not feel this good without the aid of this supplement. So it's helping you function and live your life while you're doing the more fundamental stuff that actually matters.
Yeah, it's so funny because when you were talking about taking someone's crutch, now I just keep thinking of you running around stealing people's crutches.
Kicking it out from under them. Like,
Right.
I have 2 legs.
Like, this crutch is helping you, but you can hop on one foot.
That's right.
Boom,
Get
and
over
then
it.
run away with it.
Yeah, that's not what this is about. And I will say, too, to pivot to another topic within this idea of prioritizing, I'm going to try to give a number to it. I would say, if I had to ballpark it, that about 90% of what people needs to do is kind of the same regardless of their symptoms or their diagnoses, right? Like, I don't care if you have stage 4 cancer or SIBO or a rash, you probably need good sleep. And like, similarly, I don't care if you have migraines or Crohn's or a nasal polyp, you probably want to be mindful of your nutrition, right? So like, I think that the journey looks largely similar for most people across most conditions and symptoms, which is a really big mindfuck probably for people to hear because they're probably in Facebook forums and webinars and seminars and things that make them feel like they have to laser in on the sexy diagnosis of SIBO or Candida or whatever. And I'm saying the opposite here. But that being said, 90% of the journey is the same for 90% of people, in my humble opinion. But there is that 10% where we tweak things a little bit. So I'm going to give you another example. The way that I've built my program, for example, is that we focus on the unsexy basics, the foundations, the shit that actually matters,
right,
in the first 6 modules or 6 weeks of the program. Then the second half of the program, we're getting into the sexy stuff. So we get into leaky gut, microbiome modulation, histamine and immune kind of stuff, hormones detox, antimicrobials. So normally something like histamine and mast cells and histamine intolerance and that kind of conversation would not come until week 9. But with this April group, Stephanie and I were looking through all of the intake forms and all of our correspondence with the students up until that point. This was like the first or second week of the program, I think. And we were looking through and emailing with one of the students. And a lot of his symptomology really struck us as like really blatantly histamine driven to a point where like maybe he has mast cell stuff going on for real. And, this is a guy, there's a lot of stuff going on for sure. Diarrhea multiple times a day. He's unable to put weight on because he's just losing everything. He's having diarrhea like 5 times a day. So of course he's losing weight. He's way under eating to a point where he came to one of my Q&As and he's like, do you think that the calorie count on Chronometer is accurate? And I'm like, yeah, it's probably roughly accurate. It's like, is it possible that a man of this stature, height, weight, I forget. Like, is it possible that a man of this height and this weight might need 2,500 calories a day? And I was like, yeah, that actually sounds reasonable.
Right.
Why? Why do you ask? He's like, oh, I was hoping it was wrong because he's eating like, I think it was less than 1,500 calories a day.
Yeah.
So he's undershooting his calories by 1,000 calories per day on the regular. And he's losing everything with diarrhea 5 times a day. It's like, whoa, this is brutal. Your nutrition is all over. Your nutrition's gone to shit, quite frankly. So there's a definite conversation with this person to increase calories, increase nutrients, get their nutrition on board and work on all of that stuff. But Stephanie and I, the nutritionist who works with me, we were talking about his case and we're like, it really smells mast cell-y to me. And I think this is an individual who might benefit from dampening that histamine burden earlier rather than later. Again, for everybody else, we make them wait until week 9. And it drives them batty because everybody thinks that they have a histamine problem. But for this individual, we told him in like week 1 or week 2, hey, this actually sounds like a histamine mast cell kind of thing. We gave him a little bit of heads up about what the testing might look like. And I shared with him, sometimes you could get even like your primary care or somebody to let you do a trial of something like cromulin sodium, a mast cell stabilizer, and see how you do with it. And we just got word last week that his PCP wrote him a script for cromulin sodium. Yeah. So he's going to try it. And I'm stoked. I really hope this helps him. We have a protocol, so to speak, where I would normally lead people on this very specific journey in a sequence. And I still stand by that 90% of the time for 90% of people. But here we had an individual where I think if we could calm down the mast cell stuff at least a bit, it would help him to nourish himself better, and it might help with sleep and like anxiety and other stuff. So you could always make little exceptions here or there. But here's the thing too. We did not do a full-blown protocol with him. We're not telling him to restrict histamine in his diet. We're not telling him to load up on a million different supplements. We're not telling him that like the EMFs in his house are causing histamine intolerance. We're literally just having him do a trial of cromulin while also trying to do the unsexy basic foundational stuff that's going to heal him for real. So I think that it's okay to bring in a teeny bit of sexiness into the conversation earlier in the game when it's appropriate, but that is in stark contrast to somebody who finds on a website or a webinar or a podcast or whatever something about histamine, and then they get on a tirade and they fall down the rabbit hole and they're convinced that they have a histamine problem. And they immediately restrict all of the histamine out of their food, and they get on 37 different supplements, and they become a recluse, and they get allergy testing and food sensitivity testing out the wazoo, and they're doing their GI maps, and they're looking for Klebsiella because Klebsiella makes histamine, and Googling which probiotics make histamine. You know what I mean? Like, that's a different scenario versus what I just described. Right. Even with him, it's still 90% foundations, 10%, hey, let's try this.
Mm-hmm.
So, different.
I agree.
Different vibe?
Very
dare
different
I say?
Vibe. Very different vibe. One is definitely more desperate in a way. Frantic, urgent, kind of health anxiety ridden. I agree. And again, I think the health anxiety piece or the urgency piece is always interesting because I know I felt that going through my journey. And it, again, like we said earlier, can lead you astray when it comes to prioritizing.
Absolutely. I think another good, so again, prioritize the foundational, basic, fundamental stuff first before you get into the sexy stuff. That's point number 1 of this episode. Number 2, I think when you can hit multiple targets or when you could do something that's free or cheap, you should prioritize those things versus running right into getting the fancy schmancy supplement formulation or the fancy schmancy prescription or gadget or whatever. So like maybe don't spend $500 on a vagus nerve stimulator device. Maybe just try to get outside in the sunshine more and like do some deep belly breathing or do the mind abdominal massage technique that I have on my YouTube channel. Just search mind abdominal massage. It's friggin' miraculous. I had 2 or 3 students on the Q&A this week for FODMAP Freedom who tried the Mayan abdominal massage, and they were like, holy crap, this revolutionized my life. This is amazing.
Yeah.
And the great thing is it's free. Yeah. You can do it as much as you want. It doesn't cost a nickel. It's not going to hurt you. It's only going to help. So prioritize that before you waste your time and money on fancy schmancy stuff.
I agree. I feel like I need to snap.
That's right. Snaps for me. But frankly, here's maybe a closing thought on this topic. When we open our phones or we open our web browser, we are bombarded with advertisements. This is the way the internet kind of came about. I think I heard this at some point, and I might botch it, but basically the thought was when the internet really started to gain popularity, there was this thought of like, should there be a fee that people pay once a year to access the internet? And they didn't want to do that. They wanted to make the internet accessible to anybody and everybody. So what ended up happening instead is that the way that like companies make money still and keep afloat, right? Because like there's big computer warehouses and like CPU, I don't know anything about computers, but there's like big CPUs that store the hard drives that actually house the internet. It's not just in the ether, in the air molecules, right?
Right.
So there's some physical component to maintain the internet. Well, the way that a lot of these companies stay afloat and make their money is that there's advertisements all over the internet. So whether you do a Google search or you're watching a YouTube video or you're scrolling on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, we are constantly bombarded with advertisements everywhere you look. And people are not going to be paying money to do ads for something for free. Every single advertisement that you see is hoping that they can extract money from you, right? Like the advertiser only advertises in hopes of getting money from you. And the things that we see all day, every day on our news feed and on our YouTube feed are advertisements for products and gadgets and services. And again, like these ideas of like, hey, just prioritize your sleep hygiene, dude. Like, it's not that hard. Or like massage your tummy for 5 minutes once or twice a day, like the Mind Abdominal Massage, or use the free Chronometer app to assess your nutrition and make sure that you're doing well with nutrition. Like these things get lost in the sauce because the internet is this big, loud marketing machine. And they're doing anything they can, scaring the bejesus out of you, usually, to get you to click on that ad and buy their thing. And that's all there is to it.
Yep, it's true.
So it's like,
it's wild.
The sexy stuff that does not actually matter is what we see the most of because that's where the money is. And that's where they can sell you some shit that you don't need, frankly. The unsexy foundational stuff that actually heals you hardly gets any airtime.
Right.
Except on the IBS Freedom Podcast, baby.
Oh,
plug. Tell all your friends and family. Actually, Amy, you want to know something fun about this episode?
What?
So this episode is going to post on July 15th, which is a week before my birthday. So I'm going to be bold this year. I'm going to ask all of you, share the IBS Freedom Podcast with your friends and family. You'd be surprised. 20% of the population has irritable bowel syndrome. So somebody in your friends list probably has tummy problems and would benefit from hearing our musings. So if I could be so bold, for my 38th birthday this year, if anybody would be inclined to share our podcast and how much you love it, presumably, on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or whatever, I would just be honored and delighted beyond words if you would do that. So tag me if you would like. If not, you could do it in secret, but that is my birthday wish for this year.
I'm going to share in secret.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'm Facebook friends with you. Well, and I follow you on Instagram, so I don't know how secretive it's really going to be unless, you could do one of those Facebook posts, though, where you only make it visible to certain friends and you could exclude me. So actually, you could do it in secret and I wouldn't know if you were really sneaky about it.
Yes, it's true.
There we go. The truth comes out. The little sneak, Miss Amy.
Yes.
All right. Well, in the meantime, I think we have concluded this topic of how to prioritize your shit. Hopefully we gave you some ideas to go off of, maybe helped you reprioritize your mega list of supplements and things that you're trying to do. In the meantime, we will see you back here for another episode next time about SIBO diagnostics. So stay tuned.